For centuries, humanity had lived as a peaceful part of the Galactic Council. They were known as builders, teachers, and explorers, always curious, always kind. While other species focused on conquest or control, humans sought understanding. They traded knowledge, shared medicine, and helped rebuild worlds torn apart by war. Yet this same kindness made them targets of quiet ridicule. The warrior races whispered that humans were too gentle to be taken seriously, creatures of emotion, not strength. The Zorath Empire, a proud and ancient species that valued dominance above all else, often mocked them openly in council chambers. To the Zorath, humanity's mercy was a flaw. To humanity, it was wisdom. But that difference of belief was about to start something the galaxy would never forget. The tension began with a mining dispute near the edge of Zorath space. A small human colony called Haven 9 had been extracting rare minerals on an asteroid belt that both sides claimed. Humanity, as usual, sent diplomats. They proposed sharing rights and offered to build new trade routes that would benefit both empires. The Zorath saw this as weakness. Their leaders, sitting on thrones of metal and pride, decided to teach humanity a lesson. They attacked the colony without warning. The assault lasted less than an hour. 3,000 civilians, engineers, farmers, families, gone. The Zorath commander who ordered the strike called it a reminder of strength. To them, it was nothing but a show of power. To humanity, it was something else, a wound deeper than any before. When the news reached Earth, the reaction was strange. There was no immediate outrage, no fiery speeches in the council, no threats of revenge. The alien species watching the broadcasts expected humans to beg for justice or declare war in rage. But instead, humanity fell silent. The world's networks dimmed, and leaders across the colonies met privately. For several days, there were no messages, no statements. It was as if the entire species had taken one deep breath. The galaxy mistook that silence for fear. They thought humanity had finally been broken, that their peaceful nature had been exposed for the weakness it truly was. But those who knew humans better saw something different in that quiet. It wasn't surrender. It was stillness before movement. On the remains of Haven 9, rescue ships found nothing but dust and silence. The site was broadcast secretly to Earth's defense networks. Engineers, miners, and scientists watched in silence as the screens flickered with images of what was once a thriving colony. No one shouted or cried. They simply looked and understood. That was the moment when something changed deep within the human spirit. The same hands that once built and healed now began to prepare. On Mars, shipyards that had been used for exploration quietly retooled. On Luna, hidden beneath the gray rock, military AIs long kept dormant were reactivated. Cargo ships vanished from civilian routes, redirected toward unknown coordinates. And across every channel, one message began to spread in whispers. We remember Haven 9. The Galactic Council watched nervously as humanity moved in complete silence, their leaders saying nothing to the press. The Zorath mocked them again, calling them the Silent Lambs. But some of the elder races began to feel a chill. They had seen this kind of silence before, not from humans, but from nature itself, just before the storm. The universe didn't know it yet, but humanity's patience had ended. They had been mocked for their mercy, doubted for their kindness. But mercy and kindness had limits. And once those limits were crossed, something old awakened, something the stars had never truly seen before. Humanity would not roar, boast, or threaten. They would simply act. And when they finally did, the galaxy would understand what it meant to wish they'd never asked to see humans fight. When the news of the destroyed colony reached Earth, the world seemed to stop. The skies were quiet, the media channels played the same footage in loops, and the people stared at their screens, unable to speak. The president gave no speech. The generals held no press conference. The Galactic Council waited for outrage, for a declaration of war, for the emotional reaction they always associated with humanity, but none came. There was only silence. The kind of silence that was heavy, deliberate, and filled with something unspoken. Other civilizations mistook it for fear, thinking humanity had finally been put in its place. But they were wrong. Because beneath that silence, behind the calm faces and muted broadcasts, something powerful was beginning to move. In the far reaches of Earth's orbit, old defense stations flickered to life. Lights that hadn't glowed in decades began to hum. Deep underground, forgotten bunkers reactivated, filling with the sounds of machines awakening from long sleep. In old shipyards once used to build peaceful exploration vessels, blue sparks lit the darkness as new frames began to take shape. On the moon, engineers working quietly under classified orders started transmitting coded messages to Mars. They didn't need to speak. Every human knew what needed to be done. The message spread not through speeches or commands, but through whispers that carried the same 3 words. We remember Haven 9. The movement was not loud or chaotic. It was methodical, almost calm. Scientists who had spent their lives designing tools for peace began redesigning them for survival. Mining drones were converted into defense platforms. Cargo ships were rebuilt into carriers. Factories that once produced farming equipment now produced armor plating and navigation systems. Across the colonies, people worked without being asked. No government forced them, no propaganda was needed. It wasn't duty that drove them, it was memory. Even the children understood. They watched their parents work longer hours, saw the quiet determination in their faces, and felt the shift in the air. Teachers stopped lessons early and volunteered for logistic programs. Doctors who once healed the sick began studying emergency field medicine. Everyone, from the oldest farmer on Earth to the youngest technician on Mars, felt the same pull in their hearts. Humanity didn't raise its voice. It didn't need to. The silence spoke louder than any speech could. Meanwhile, the Galactic Council grew restless. Reports of increased activity around Earth's colonies began to circulate. Surveillance drones captured strange movements, fleets forming in patterns they didn't understand, signals bouncing through hidden satellites. They are preparing for war, one alien delegate whispered. But others laughed. They're just panicking, said another. They don't have the strength to fight the Zorath. Yet deep down, unease grew. Because no one had ever seen humans act this quietly before. On Earth, in a windowless control room beneath the surface, a group of commanders watched as green lights blinked across the system map. Each light represented readiness. A ship, a colony, a defense grid. One by one, the lights turned on. The lead officer looked at the board for a long moment and said softly, "They think we're afraid." Another voice replied, "Let them." The silence continued for days, stretching into weeks. The galaxy grew impatient, expecting a broken, defeated species to plead for mercy. But humanity had no intention of pleading. They were not afraid, they were preparing. The storm was coming, and when it finally broke, it would not arrive with thunder or rage. It would arrive with precision, unity, and purpose. The galaxy had mistaken humanity's quiet for weakness. Soon they would learn that silence wasn't fear, it was focus. And when humanity focused, even the stars would learn to tremble. The Zorath Empire had expected a simple reaction, a protest, maybe a few angry words in the Galactic Council, perhaps even a symbolic fleet to show defiance. They were ready to crush whatever came their way. But what they saw instead made even their most confident generals uneasy. The skies above Mars glowed with red light as new ships rose from its surface. Not the small, old freighters they remembered, but sleek. Dark vessels forged from alloys the Dominion scanners couldn't identify. Their movements were silent, coordinated, precise. It was as if humanity had been waiting not for this war, but for the moment when it was finally necessary to reveal what they had become. The first transmission came not from Earth's government, but from the fleet itself. A simple declaration broadcast across every channel. Evacuation of civilian zones is advised. We are not negotiating. We are moving. There were no demands, no threats, and no emotion. The words were calm, direct, and final. The Zorath command dismissed it as arrogance, but their confidence began to fade when their long-range scanners detected the truth. Humanity's shipyards were active across the solar system. On Luna, Titan, and even the frozen moons of Jupiter, hidden facilities came to life. Fleets were forming not in one place but everywhere. What unsettled the galaxy even more was humanity's silence. There were no speeches, no displays of fury. Soldiers didn't chant or boast. They simply went to work. In orbit, engineers welded armor panels with quiet precision. Mechanics checked engines 3 times before launch. Pilots ran through simulations again and again, not out of fear, but perfectionism. They didn't rush. They didn't panic. Every move was deliberate, a dance rehearsed through centuries of struggle. Humanity wasn't building for revenge. They were building for justice. In the great shipyards of Mars, massive banners hung with a single phrase, "For Haven 9." The name of the fallen colony became their heartbeat. Across every human world, it was whispered like a prayer, not one of hate, but remembrance. Even the youngest cadets who had never seen the colony's stars carried that name etched on their armor. To the galaxy, it looked like mobilization. To humanity, it was awakening. The new fleet, known simply as the Terran Line, didn't resemble the ships the Zorath had fought before. They weren't made for conquest. They were made for endurance. Each vessel was self-sustaining, powered by fusion cores refined over generations of research. Their weapons didn't roar like the Zorath cannons. They hummed with precision energy, silent and deadly. From afar, the formation of the fleet looked like a shadow spreading across the void, calm yet unstoppable. When the first human fleet departed Mars orbit, millions watched from every colony. There were no cheers, no cries for vengeance. Only quiet salutes. Families stood on rooftops, eyes raised toward the red sky, watching their ships disappear into the stars. For the first time in history, humanity moved as one, not as nations, not as corporations, but as a single, united species. Engineers, scientists, soldiers, and civilians worked in harmony. Every action, every heartbeat carried the same purpose. On the other side of the galaxy, the Zorath commanders began to realize their mistake. They had wanted to see humanity fight, to prove themselves superior. Now, they were seeing something far greater. A species that didn't fight for glory, but for meaning. The humans' silence wasn't hesitation. It was focus, the calm before the strike. As the last human fleet disappeared into the dark between worlds, one transmission was left on an open channel, a simple recording from a deep space beacon near Mars. It contained only 2 words, "We're coming." There was no rage, no hatred, just quiet determination. And that, more than anything, terrified the galaxy. Because when humans moved together, when they fought not for power but for justice, there was no force in the universe that could stop them. When the human fleet finally entered Zorath space, the galaxy held its breath. For generations, no species had ever dared to cross that border. The Zorath Empire, proud and ancient, had long been the face of dominance. Their worlds stretched across hundreds of systems, each fortified with fleets so large they could eclipse a planet's horizon. But that morning, for the first time in history, the mighty Zorath Armada found itself on the defensive. The humans didn't arrive with a roar. They didn't announce themselves with threats or war cries. They simply appeared, their black, angular ships sliding out of hyperspace in complete silence. There were no flashy maneuvers, no wasted movement. Every ship had a purpose, every formation an intent. The Zorath commanders expected an attack on their cities, their people, the way wars had always been fought. But the humans didn't target civilians. Their strikes were deliberate, clean, and terrifyingly precise. The first wave of human ships bypassed populated worlds entirely and went straight for the Empire's heart, its war factories, orbital shipyards, and communication centers. Within minutes, the Empire's main defense grid began to flicker. Their commanders scrambled to issue new orders, but the human fleet had already mapped every weakness. Massive orbital stations that had stood for centuries crumbled under coordinated kinetic strikes, shattering into silence before a single distress signal could escape. The galaxy watched through intercepted transmissions. Millions of alien species glued to their screens as the impossible unfolded. They had always seen humanity as emotional, impulsive, even naive. But what they saw now was something else entirely, a kind of calm efficiency that chilled even their strongest warriors. The humans didn't shout in victory. They didn't gloat. They moved from one target to the next, unstoppable and mercilessly disciplined. It was as if they weren't fighting a war, but conducting a clean, precise operation. The Zorath fleet launched counterattacks in desperation, sending thousands of ships into the fray. But every time they advanced, the humans were already gone, repositioned, waiting. Drones disguised as debris released swarms of micro-missiles that tore through their lines. Stealth ships emerged from the shadows of gas giants, striking before vanishing into the void. In just a few hours, the once invincible Zorath defense network began to collapse. From the Galactic Council's perspective, it looked like magic, but it wasn't. It was mastery. Humanity had studied the Zorath for decades, learning their patterns, their pride, their reliance on intimidation. And now they were using that very arrogance against them. On the bridge of the lead Terran ship, the commanders said little. Orders were given in short, calm phrases. Strike here. Disable that array. No civilian targets. Their silence wasn't cold. It was focused. Every move had meaning, every shot was earned. When one of the alien observers later described the battle, they said, "It was like watching surgeons operate on the stars." By the end of the first day, the Zorath's outer fleets were gone. Entire sectors that had once glowed with military power now drifted in eerie quiet. Wreckage floated through the darkness like forgotten monuments to arrogance. The humans didn't pursue the fleeing ships. They simply stopped. Their fleet held position, engines silent, like a warning written across the sky. The galaxy watched in awe and fear. The species once mocked for kindness and restraint had just dismantled an empire's pride without raising their voice. The Zorath were left speechless, their leaders trembling as they realized what they had unleashed. Humanity hadn't fought with rage. They hadn't fought for dominance. They had fought for justice. And the quiet way they did it, without anger, without cruelty, was more terrifying than any weapon ever built. In that moment, the galaxy understood. Humanity's silence was louder than any battle cry. The Zorath Empire had never known fear, until they fought humans. For centuries, they had crushed rebellions, enslaved planets, and silenced anyone who dared to stand against them. Their fleets were legendary, their technology unmatched, and their arrogance absolute. But as the war continued, that arrogance began to crumble. Every tactic they tried, every formation they used, every weapon they unleashed, humanity learned, adapted, and countered it faster than the Zorath could believe. It wasn't just strategy, it was instinct. Humans didn't fight like conquerors. They fought like survivors, people who had faced extinction before and refused to bow to it ever again. In the first few days of the counter-strike, the Zorath commanders thought the humans were lucky. By the third day, they realized it wasn't luck. It was evolution in motion. Human ships began to change their battle formations mid-fight, predicting enemy movements almost before they happened. Damaged ships repaired themselves using automated drones. Fleets operated without central command, each captain making perfect decisions as if they shared a single mind. Every mistake became a lesson, every lesson became strength. For the first time, the Zorath's legendary confidence began to crack. The humans didn't fight with anger or hatred. Their silence on the battlefield was haunting. There were no shouts over the comms, no music, no boasts, just calm voices issuing short, clear orders. The Zorath were used to war being loud and chaotic, but this was something else. A quiet storm that consumed everything in its path. When the Zorath home fleet entered the battle to defend their core systems, they expected a glorious final stand. Instead, it was a massacre. The battle lasted only hours. The Zorath fleet, once the pride of the galaxy, fell piece by piece. Every time they tried to regroup, human ships struck from an unseen angle. Their massive war cruisers, once symbols of power, became burning wrecks drifting through their own skies. Communication lines failed, command ships vanished from radar, and their once unbreakable unity dissolved into panic. The empire that had mocked humanity's softness now begged for coordination and mercy. Neither came. But then, something unexpected happened. Just as the final Zorath capital ship exploded into silence, the human fleet stopped firing. Every gun, every missile, every fighter drone went quiet. The galaxy watched in disbelief as the humans simply stopped. They didn't pursue the survivors, didn't destroy what was left. The void was filled only with the echo of burning metal and static transmissions. Then a single broadcast appeared across every galactic frequency, a message from Earth, transmitted in clear, unbroken tone. It said, "Don't ask us to fight again. No threats. No conditions. No speeches about victory or vengeance. Just a warning, simple, final, and unforgettable." It wasn't said with pride or rage, but with something far deeper: exhaustion. Humanity hadn't fought to prove dominance or gain territory. They had fought because they were forced to. And now, with their mission complete, they were done. The galaxy realized the horrifying truth. Humans didn't enjoy war, but when they were pushed into one, they ended it completely. The Zorath homeworld burned in silence, its proud banners reduced to ashes. The once feared Empire now sent desperate messages for peace, but humanity did not reply. They withdrew their fleets, leaving behind wreckage in a galaxy forever changed. Other species stared at the aftermath, trembling at what they had witnessed. The humans had no interest in conquest, only survival. And that made them the most dangerous kind of species, because they didn't fight for power. They fought to make sure they'd never have to fight again. When the human fleets finally returned home, there were no fireworks, no grand parades, and no songs of victory. The skies over Earth were clear, calm, and eerily quiet, a silence that spoke louder than any celebration ever could. The war had ended quickly, yes, but the cost had been heavy. Thousands of ships hadn't come back. Entire families stood by the landing ports, waiting for faces that would never step off the transports. Humanity had won, but victory felt hollow, because every person knew what it had taken to get there. Across the cities, people placed candles in their windows, small, flickering lights that turned the planet into a sea of gentle fire. It wasn't for pride, but remembrance. Each flame represented someone who had gone into the stars and never returned. Mothers whispered their names, children held photos, and soldiers stood in quiet reflection. No one cheered. No one shouted. They simply remembered. For humanity, this was not a moment of triumph. It was a moment of understanding. In the heart of Earth's capital, the leaders of the United Earth Command met not to plan new conquests, but to discuss rebuilding. The war had proven their strength, but it also reminded them of their fragility. Every screen across the world displayed the same message: peace is earned, not given. It wasn't a slogan. It was a truth written in loss. The people of Earth didn't seek revenge or domination. They wanted to make sure no child would ever have to grow up watching the sky and wonder if it was safe. In hospitals across the colonies, wounded soldiers told their stories not with anger, but with quiet pride. Many spoke of friends who had sacrificed themselves to protect others. One engineer said, "We built weapons that could destroy empires, but what saved us was compassion." Those words spread quickly through the networks. It became the new motto of a world that had rediscovered its soul. The strange thing about humanity's victory was how it humbled them. Before the war, they had been underestimated by the galaxy. After it, they could have ruled it, but they didn't. Instead, they withdrew their fleets, dismantled the massive war factories, and returned to their fields, cities, and homes. Humanity had proved they were capable of unimaginable power, and yet what they wanted most was to never use it again. That restraint, that humility, became the very thing that made the galaxy respect them. On Mars, a memorial was built, a giant circle of glass filled with the names of the fallen, facing toward the stars. Visitors could see their own reflections mingled with those names, as if reminding everyone that peace was not a gift from the heavens, but a choice made by those who had seen the worst of war. Children visited the site and left flowers shaped like the emblems of the colonies, not for soldiers, but for the dream of peace they had died to protect. In time, humanity became a symbol not of destruction, but of resilience. Other races, once fearful, now sought to learn from them, how they rebuilt, how they forgave, how they refused to let victory turn into arrogance. Humanity didn't answer with pride. They simply said, "We fought because we were pushed. We stopped because we remembered." The stars shone a little dimmer that year, but the people of Earth didn't see it as darkness. They saw it as rest, the calm that follows a storm. They had won the war no one wanted, and in doing so, they had reminded themselves why peace mattered. War, even when victorious, always left scars. But those scars also told the story of survival, and of a species strong enough to fight, yet wise enough to stop. When the war ended, the galaxy stood still. For the first time in living memory, the Great Galactic Council, a coalition of hundreds of civilizations, called an emergency summit not to declare war, but to confront the terrifying truth they had witnessed. Humanity had been mocked for centuries as an emotional, unpredictable, and fragile species. Yet they had just defeated the most powerful empire in the known universe, and they had done it without cruelty, without conquest, and without boasting. The halls of the council, once filled with political games and arrogance, now echoed with whispers of fear and respect. Everyone wanted to understand what kind of species humanity truly was. Representatives from across the stars arrived, towering reptilian monarchs, crystalline diplomats who shimmered with light, and ancient machine entities that spoke in tones older than time. But when the humans entered, the entire chamber went silent. The ambassador who represented Earth was not a general or a politician. He was an ordinary man, calm, middle-aged, wearing a simple suit with a small Earth emblem on the sleeve. There was no crown, no medal, no weapon, just quiet confidence. When he took the floor, his voice was steady, but carried a weight that made every being in the room listen. "We didn't want this war," he began. "We asked for peace, and you mocked us for it. We showed mercy, and you called it weakness. You wanted to see us fight, and now you've seen it. But let me be clear. We never want to fight again." His words hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Some of the alien delegates tried to speak, to apologize, to explain, to offer alliances, but the ambassador raised his hand. "We don't seek to rule," he continued. "We don't want your worlds, your fleets, or your wealth. We only ask for one thing, that no one make us fight again." Those simple words carried more power than any weapon humanity had ever built. They weren't a threat. They were a promise that if provoked again, the galaxy might not survive the response. The council chambers remained silent long after he finished. The Zorath delegation, what was left of it, sat motionless. Even the most aggressive species, the ones who had once prided themselves on domination, couldn't bring themselves to meet the humans' gaze. For the first time, they understood the cost of arrogance. The galaxy had learned that humanity's peace wasn't born of weakness. It was born of experience. They were a species that had known destruction, rebuilt themselves, and chosen compassion over conquest. After the meeting, the council voted unanimously to pass a new law, one that forbade any unprovoked aggression toward developing civilizations. They called it the Terran Accord, named in honor of Earth. It became the foundation for a new galactic order, one that valued diplomacy over domination. Every star system etched those words into their archives. "We don't seek to rule. We only ask that no one make us fight again." Back on Earth, the message was received by billions watching across every colony. People didn't cheer, they simply smiled. Humanity had spoken not as conquerors, but as survivors. And for the first time, the galaxy understood the meaning behind that human smile. It wasn't pride. It wasn't arrogance. It was the quiet strength of a species that could fight harder than anyone else, yet still choose not to. That day, humanity didn't just win a war. They changed how the galaxy viewed strength forever. From that moment on, no alien race ever laughed at the word peace again. In the decades that followed, the story of the Terran retaliation spread like fire across the stars. Entire generations grew up hearing the tale of how a quiet, seemingly harmless species from a small blue planet had stood against one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy, and won. In alien schools, younglings whispered the name human with both awe and caution. To them, Earth was no longer just another world. It was a legend wrapped in mystery. Parents told their children, never anger the humans, not as a threat, but as a warning rooted in deep respect. And yet, among the stars, a strange admiration also grew. Humanity had shown something no other species had ever dared to: mercy and victory. On Earth, however, the people didn't see themselves as legends or conquerors. They didn't build monuments of warships or celebrate their power. Instead, they planted trees where factories once stood. They rebuilt their homes, their schools, and their art. In every city, from the domed colonies on Mars to the ocean platforms on Earth, people chose to create rather than destroy. The scars of war remained, in the soil, in the minds of those who fought, and in the silence of those who didn't return. But those scars became lessons. They reminded humanity not of their might, but of their responsibility. The leaders of Earth made sure that the new era wasn't one of dominance, but of peace. The Terran Accord signed after the war became a symbol of that promise. It ensured that humanity would never be forced into a corner again, but it also reminded them never to let pride dictate their actions. The galaxy had seen what humans were capable of, and now, humanity wanted to show what they could be when they weren't fighting. Builders of worlds, healers of wounds, and dreamers of futures that stretched beyond fear. In time, alien ambassadors began to visit Earth again, though always with quiet reverence. They found a planet filled not with soldiers, but with poets, engineers, and explorers. They saw children laughing in green fields where once missiles had been built, and families gazing at the night sky. Not with suspicion, but with curiosity. Humanity had returned to what it did best, learning, growing, and reaching for the stars not to conquer them, but to understand them. But still, among the stars, the legend remained, a whisper carried through spaceports and trading routes, a saying that crossed languages and species alike. Humans don't start wars, but when they do, no one ever asks them to again. It became a proverb carved into alien academies, quoted by generals, and repeated in council halls whenever tempers rose. It wasn't just fear that kept the peace. It was the memory of humanity's restraint. For the humans themselves, the war became a distant memory, one they honored but never glorified. They smiled again, not with pride, but with peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing your strength but choosing not to use it. In every corner of the galaxy, that quiet, knowing human smile became a symbol of survival, of endurance, and of the fragile balance between power and compassion. And so, while the universe moved on, one truth remained unshaken. Humanity, the species once underestimated, had taught the galaxy a lesson written not in destruction, but in wisdom. They had shown that true strength isn't in how loudly you fight, but in how softly you choose to live afterward.